everybody. This is Jordan Bradford here with Jeff Beck, and you're listening to Just Ballin' with JB, brought to you by D. Oliver Design. For all your commercial graphic design needs, visit dolliverdesign.com. Join us each week as we break down the best stories in sports and play a few games along the way. But this week, we're going to be a little abbreviated for episode 8 because I'm on new dad duty and new dad's sleep. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a little baby girl, a little baby Stone, born on Friday at 8:37 a.m. She was 7 pounds 2 ounces. Mama and baby are happy and healthy, but dad is a little on the tired side, lack of sleep. So all you other dads out there, I'm sure, know what's going on, but we're going to keep this one a little quick this week, and then we should be back to our normal length here coming up for episode 8. But with that said, Jeff, let's jump into the NBA. What do we got cooking NBA-wise right now?
Yeah, we touched on last week, Los Angeles Lakers, obviously, big team in the NBA, Bron and Bronny, Anthony Davis, JJ Redick, new coach. So, yeah, we talked last week about them needing to get off to a good start. They did that. They won their first game of the season. I think they started 3-0, was it? They dropped the last two. 3-2, but that was kind of exactly what we laid out for them, I think, was getting to 3-2 out of the first 5 games. And we went through the list of who they were playing. Yeah, kind of exactly what we expected. Get that first win of the season, that under the belt of JJ Redick. That always feels good to get your first win your first game of the season in the LeBron era. That's got to feel decent. And get a little momentum going. Anthony Davis is looking great. I think this was after the 5th game that they had played that he was leading the MVP race. He's just looking phenomenal, dominating. Again, we talked about that last week. JJ was going to be able to put him in some really good positions, score and look good. So I think LeBron, you're seeing he's not going to have it every night at his age, but I think they're looking good. JJ's looking like he's got them motivated and to get off to a good start.
Yeah, JJ looks like he's, a pretty good NBA coach, NBA is a little different than some of the other sports. I think every sports coaches kind of play different roles, right? So I think the NFL, your coach has got to be a real tactician, right? They got to know everything, be a good leader. Like it's probably the most important coaching or head coaching spot is an NFL coach. MLB, the manager, their head coach, the manager, I think is more or less kind of just like a game manager kind of position now with especially with all the new analytics that have bled into the sport. But the NBA is kind of right there in the middle where it does feel like you need somebody who kind of knows how to manage the game, manage minutes, but also somebody who's got a little tactician in them and got a little, motivator, kind of attributes. And I think JJ's got a lot of those attributes across the board. I think he's good at motivating. He's great on the tactician side. And I also think he knows how to manage minutes of these players. He's played in the league. He played in the league for a long time. I think you're seeing the results on the court that he's putting guys in positions to be successful. And that's what a head coach in the NBA needs to do. I love what he's doing with AD. If AD continues to play this well all season, this is going to be a Lakers team that is going to be feared in the rest of the league. Barring, any sort of injury concerns, which is, true with everybody. But when you have a team with older superstars, obviously you want to be a little bit more careful with that. I think this Lakers team is looking really, really solid.
Definitely agreed. I think the different, like you mentioned in coaches, I think with the NFL, you have to really lead immediately prior to games. You have to really be setting the players up. I think the NBA, the coach can kind of fill in where he needs to, so to speak. You're obviously leading the team, but if you have some really good guys that have great chemistry, they can just kind of go out and play in the NBA. Whereas if they're struggling, they're not finding good baskets, they're not finding players in the right spots, have to be ready to step in and give those guys those look when they need them. And I think JJ is doing that. He's starting them off in the right position, but if things slow down, he's able to jump in and get them into the right spots, which is great. On the other hand, though, they're
on the flip
of
side,
our favorite teams, Bucks, a little bit of the opposite, I'd say.
Yeah, disastrous start for our Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, you just really can't draw up a worse scenario here. I mean, they won their opening game and then are now 1-3 as we're filming this right now. It looks like they're on the verge of falling to 1-4. This is just a bad start. You can't have a start like this after the way you finished last season and frankly played most of the season. It was a bad season. I saw some graphics recently comparing, Doc Rivers' first like 50 games now with the Bucks versus Adrian Griffin's or however many games it was, and he's significantly worse. So, say what you will about Adrian Griffin, say what you will about Doc Rivers as a coach, their historical records, kind of just who they are as coaches in general. But the records speak for themselves. They're coaching the same team, and it looks to me that the Bucks got marketably worse with Doc Rivers as head coach, and I don't know what they really can't do anything about it. They're already paying too many coaches right now. They locked Doc up on this long contract, and so now it looks like they're stuck with him. And I don't know what they're going to do. Maybe they can get out of this funk, but man, it doesn't look good right now.
I think, coming in, as much as you try and give Doc some credit for what he's done, I know a lot of people don't want to, and they, look at the amount of times he's lost series where he's up 3-1, things of that nature. He obviously has enough of a track record to not be highly encouraged by him, but try to give him some upside and think there's a chance there. But it just feels that way. I did think my one concern was the roster was getting a little bit older than we even realized, kind of right before your eyes, just starting to age a little bit. But when you look at it, this is those opportunities when you talk about kind of coaching in the NBA, where I do have to look at him, whether it's motivation from the players, but also I look at it, Giannis is averaging 28.8 points a game, 6.3 assists, and 11.8 rebounds. So, I mean, just shy of 30, 12, and 6. Lillard is sitting there. He's averaging 28, 6 assists, and 6 rebounds. I mean, if you look at those two players alone, averaging those numbers, if you watch the box score, you would think they have to be winning some of these games. So either all the role players are playing absolutely terrible, these starters are, getting good scoring stats, in garbage time, or there's something wrong, in the midst of the game where these guys are not gelling and playing well. And that to me feels like the answer. And I think that's where Doc needs to be stepping in, figuring out, is it getting other people involved? But what are we doing? Whether it's defensively, but to see those two guys averaging those kind of numbers and start 1-3, and like you said, today, currently getting blown out as we speak, not a good sign for Milwaukee.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, they don't have a lot of time to turn this around with an aging roster. You've got a superstar in Giannis who's still clearly in his prime, as good as he's ever been. And the clock's going to start ticking on what does he want to do? I don't see Giannis wanting to sit down and just, be on some average to below average team for the rest of his career. But if you're the Bucks, I don't know what kind of moves you can make. You've made a lot of big, massive trades. You've traded a lot of your draft capital away. You don't have a lot of young assets. I mean, the best thing you've got now outside of Giannis is an old Damian Lillard, who, while he still is a pretty good player, he's a defensive liability. And then you've got, Chris Middleton, who, he just isn't available right now still. He's got a lot of injury history. And he's also getting up there in age. So it is not a good sign in Milwaukee with what's going on. All things considered, I think that, it's been worth it because they got an NBA championship out of this whole thing. But you got to feel like at this point, it's looking like they really have underachieved the potential that you would have expected them to be at 5 years ago.
Yeah. No question. They're going to have to pick it up quickly. I mean, we've talked a lot about the kind of age of parity in basketball. And, I did make my pick early on that the Celtics would be the first to repeat in quite some time, which they're looking pretty good themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But, when you talk about that, just these teams winning, I mean, you look at some of the last champions, the Lakers have not sniffed it since they won it in 2020. Milwaukee has not sniffed it since they won it after. Denver is looking like they are just on an absolute decline from where they are at. And some of the players, when you look at some of the top talent on those teams, Giannis, Jokic, Bron, AD, you look at these guys, they're still playing really well individually. So it is a weird thing. I mean, we've seen some coaches fired on, I think, all of those teams, except for, I guess, the Denver. But yeah, you start to wonder, is it some of the coaching that's involved? If the players are still playing fairly well, yeah, they're going to have to change something pretty quickly. Or maybe someone's going to come in and make them change something.
Yeah. Well, speaking of change, let's change sports a little bit here and talk about baseball. MLB season just wrapped up last night with the Dodgers winning their eighth ever World Series in what was, billed as a classic matchup between the LA Dodgers and the New York Yankees. But, fizzled out a little bit there. Some exciting games, no doubt, but Dodgers win at 4-1 and Yankees just didn't have enough. It looked like. So, any thoughts on the World Series this year?
I mean, those are always interesting. We've seen it, in the NBA a few times. I think the most recent was the Lakers playing Denver, and you saw those games come down to the wire every game, and a buzzer beater ended it, and then you still get swept at the end of it. And that's what's tough is you can play every game close, but it's only the first four, and you go from there. So yeah, I mean, to lose it 4-1 obviously doesn't look very good. The games, like you said, a lot of the games in there were fairly close. Yeah, I just took away. I mean, the Dodgers really came out and did what they had to do. I mean, Freddie Freeman, incredible, ties the record. I think it was six straight World Series games with a home run dating back to the last World Series he was in. Uh,
Yeah,
he just was
that's hard to
incredible. I mean,
believe he
the
could do
clear
that.
cut
That's insane.
real six in a row. I mean, even doing four in a row would seem a sweep or something would seem crazy. But yeah, to do six straight, the fact that kept pitching to him and he kept doing damage. I mean, he was the MVP after the third game, pretty much regardless of what happened. There was almost no chance the Dodgers would lose. He was going to win it. Mookie Betts, phenomenal again. I mean, he gets another ring. That dude's just a heck of a player. So I just thought the Dodgers all came to play. He just never really seemed to have it. Obviously a lot of talk of Judge and kind of his postseason disappointment. One of those things that's tough. You hate to sit there and criticize a guy who had not only such a great season this year, but has had a great career. We've done it with other players, whether it's Lamar in football, whether it's James Harden or Joel Embiid in NBA. Big time players put up such big numbers during the regular season, and then they're not there. It's tough. And I get baseball is a little more of a slumpy sport than basketball or football, right? It can happen very easily throughout games, but when you see it consistently, again, when the sample size becomes big enough and you're saying, well, it's always happening in the postseason, it's happening in the World Series, it's not great for them. So yeah, that was unfortunate. I thought he took it on the chin pretty well based on the comments I saw him make after, but yeah, you got to give the Dodgers a lot of credit. Those guys stepped up, played well, and just took it to them right away.
Yeah, the Yankees. I think they just shot themselves in the foot. You can't play such sloppy baseball and expect to win in the World Series. I'm a big Aaron Judge fan. I think he's an awesome player, but when you're the star of the team, you got to show up in the biggest moments. It's the case in baseball, it's the case in football, it's the case in every sport. If you're the guy and you don't show up in these big moments, unfortunately your teams are going to struggle. And there's exceptions to the rule where you have these situations where maybe a star has a bad performance in a big game and somebody else steps up, but you can't be counting on that. And in a sport like baseball where it's a 7-game series and you're not playing well in almost any of those games, your average players or your bottom tier starters, they're not going to be the guys that are going to step up night in and night out for you. So at some point, I got to say it, Judge has got to actually perform in these big moments. And I want to see it happen because I think he's a Hall of Fame caliber player. But what he's missing is those postseason moments that we want him to see or what we want him to have, right? And especially on a team like the Yankees, you just kind of expect the star for the Yankees to perform so well. And in large part, that's because, at least like us, we grew up watching Derek Jeter do that. He was the star player on the team. Whether he was the best player every single year, certainly up for debate. But he was clearly the heart and soul of that team and a star player, Hall of Fame player. And he showed up every single postseason. He was always just as good. His numbers are literally like identical regular season to postseason. I think they're actually like a slight tick above his
Yeah.
regular season statistics were in his postseason career. And that is what we want to see out of our superstars. And that's what we need to see out of Aaron Judge.
No question. I mean, he deserves, some criticism for how it played out, the loss, and it'll be interesting to see how their offseason goes. I mean, the Dodgers as well. Do they keep trying to get back to it, build on what they got? Are the Yankees going to be able to get guys back, get Odo back? I mean, there's some names that'll be, in question to see what they do. So you thought it'd be a little bit better, just those two teams. It could have been a little more exciting against some close games, which were fun to watch, but overall series did not quite live up to the hype.
But it was still a fun series. It was fun to watch. The two biggest teams in the sport face off against each other, and let's hope we get more of that from baseball because they need it, honestly. But we're going to go ahead and switch gears again. We're going to get to the NFL. And we're going to talk a couple games here that were intriguing to us over the weekend. First game is Eagles-Bengals. And I know, Jeff, this had to have been a good game for you because you've been pretty high on the Eagles for a while now. And not necessarily, that you're like, I don't know, you would call yourself an Eagles fan, but I think you like a lot about the Eagles. You like a lot of their players. You kind of like, the way they play football. And you felt like they're a pretty good team, even when other people have been down on them. And you've also been, pretty critical of the Cincinnati Bengals. And, you wrote them off pretty early on in the season. And so this game had to have felt like a bit of a win-win for you. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you put it pretty perfectly there. I mean, I don't wish the Bengals to be bad. You watch the games and you see them. I think they're a good 3-5 team, but just, once you dig yourself that kind of hole, I think it's tough to get out of. I think that defense just really is never going to be there when you're relying that heavily on just the offense and, mainly the quarterback. I mean, at the end of the day, the running isn't terrible. You get rid of Joe Mixon. It's on, Burrow to get it to those star receivers. They obviously have a great receiving core, but it's about him getting it to them. When that's your whole recipe, it just feels like it shouldn't be that difficult to shut that down. I just kind of felt they were in that spot, and this loss, obviously, to me, just kind of cements that, and probably maybe a few more people are jumping on that side at this point. But more about the Eagles to me. Really, like I said, I thought they're a good team last year. Again, I mean, just a really strange finish, and I don't know how you explain, going from that record to where they did. This year, it's kind of been a little up and down to start the year, and now it feels like they're starting to get on this roll. I think the biggest questions for them were the defense. We've all been talking about the Bengals offense being that good, Joe Burrow being that good. To hold them to 17 points, I thought was huge. Weeks prior, the Browns, Giants, obviously not top-tier competition. So it was great to see that against the Bengals offense specifically, right? Regardless of what you think about their team, to see them hold their offense to 17, I thought was great. So those guys are really starting to roll on defense. And then offensively, I mean, Jalen Hurts, 236 yards, 1 touchdown. Not anything that's getting you super excited passing the ball there, but he's taking care of it, right? Another game with no turnovers, which is huge. That was another big criticism of their team was, can Jalen Hurts not only be a good quarterback, but take care of the ball and just not really hurt them? So he does that, not to mention, 3 rushing touchdowns, which is just ridiculous. I'm not saying they're overly impressive when they're from the 1-yard line. But again, another critique was Jason Kelce retires. Are they going to still have the tush push? Is it going to be there? Clearly, that seems to be working just fine for him. So that stuff's all great. And then lastly, the coaching. We talked about it last week and kind of my thought process and philosophy with he's still there. There can't be this hate. And there was some interview Saquon came out and did. And I think he actually said he expected that he might butt heads with Sirianni a little bit just because of how he's pretty reserved, kind of a Jalen Hurts type of character. And he sees all the stuff about Sirianni and how loud he is. He was a little afraid that maybe they would butt heads. And he said he's actually come in and loves the guy. He's like, everybody's different and we all have our own personalities and you have to be yourself and kind of feed off each other. So I think hearing that from him, I mean, he's got to be a leader in that locker room. I thought it was just kind of further indication that the team is there. Something obviously went on, and they weren't able to piece it all together. But it looks like they're starting to get on a nice little roll. They're figuring out how to play well together, how to design the game, how to scheme it up. And so, yeah, I think they're looking really good. I think the Commanders better watch out for the Eagles to come up and snatch that spot from them.
Yeah, it appears like it's definitely a two-horse race in the NFC East. Obviously, the Commanders, win against the Bears. We don't have to really go into that. I think that's been talked about quite a bit
Depressing.
this week. Yeah, and honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready to go there personally. But yeah, I think the Eagles and the Commanders, obviously, that's going to be fun to watch those two duke it out the rest of the way in the NFC East. I mean, obviously, the Giants are the Giants. They're at the bottom, and the Cowboys are really what we kind of always assume the Cowboys are, which is, they're a pretty talented team when you look at their roster, and then pretty disappointing when you watch them play, especially when they play against good football teams like the Niners. So, it's funny. I not to get too off onto the Cowboys, but the Cowboys seem to always lose to the Niners, who always lose to the Chiefs. And it's like, imagine like that's the difference, right? Because the Cowboys think of themselves as Super Bowl contenders. They can't even beat a team that can't beat the Super Bowl contenders repeatedly. Like they are
Yeah,
so far away from contending that it's not even funny. They need to strip that whole thing down and just start fresh. But unfortunately, when your owner is the GM and like an assistant head coach almost for the team, and he's also 80 some years old, I don't think he wants to strip it down because he's not sure he's going to make it for the rebuild. But the Eagles, on the other hand, I think looked great, man. They had a great looking offense. People will, give Jalen, I think, a lot of shit for, getting these 1 yard touchdowns. But at the end of the day, look at that Bears game. They're handing it off to a lineman to try to get in from the 1 yard.
it's
Like,
a great
at
point.
least
Yeah.
say he gets in. Like, you got to score from there. And how many
Heard someone
times
the
do
other
we
day
see
said that
guys
they're
not being
like
able to do that?
anybody do that, and it's like, well, I don't agree because last year when it was so guaranteed, it was like, well, you got Jason Kelsey, the best, and you got a huge quarterback who we've all seen his lifting videos and stuff. Like they were giving him credit then when it was so good, and now it's like, oh, anybody could do that. It's like, if anybody could do it, why wouldn't you do it and get the touchdown instead of fumbling to your lineman, right? I mean, it's pretty clear. I'm not saying they're incredibly impressive over the top, but they are something that he is good at compared to other quarterbacks. It is a skill set.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that, it's gotten to the point now where if anyone in the NFL sphere says, well, of course, that's too easy of a play, or, that's like a guaranteed touchdown, then so it's not impressive. If your team's not replicating it, then shame on you.
Hire the
And you're a
coach.
bad coach. Because if it's that easy, do it. Like, I have no qualms if the Bears start doing that and it works. But here's what I'll say is I don't think it's that easy to run. I think it looks easy because like you said, you've got a quarterback who squats like 450 pounds or 500 pounds or whatever it is. Not many quarterbacks are built physically like Jalen Hurts. And I also just think that's a great offensive line that the Eagles have.
Yeah.
Yes, they lost a great Hall of Fame center to retirement, but that offensive line still is very, very good. And it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of cohesiveness. And it takes a lot of guts to, come up with a play like that you can run repeatedly when everybody knows you're doing it and you're still successful, yet no other team has managed to even really try it. I'm starting to like call BS on all these people who are saying that it's like too easy of a play then. I just think that if it's that easy, run it yourselves.
There's also
So
a risk
that's my little rant
reward
on that.
a risk reward thing to it as well. I mean, you see a lot of these quarterbacks getting hurt. Like, are you going to run that if you have Tua, no matter how easy of a play it is? Guarantee you're not going to do that, right? If you have Jaden Daniels, are you going to want to do that? There, like that's kind of, it's not only a skill set that he has, but it is a risk reward. I mean, Jalen obviously dealt with injuries last year, and I think that was a piece of what derailed their season last year. They were winning early, but I think you could see Jalen was not comfortable. He was not rushing the ball, which is a huge piece of his game. that's what we give Lamar so much credit for. Not only being able to get out and run, extend plays, pick up first downs in big moments, but then to do the smart thing and get down and save yourself in those spots. You're definitely putting your body on the line. So it's a risk reward. I mean, you could run a naked boot where you send the whole line's going right and you sweep out left. If it's wide open, you're like, well, that's just too easy. But it's like, it's pretty risky because if the other end stays there and it's just him and the quarterback and he takes, it's a risk reward type of play. So I agree with you. I think anybody, still saying that there is levels to the impressiveness, right? 20-yard scrambles for touchdown are a little different than 1 yard tush push, but still impressive and it still works, right? That was the last critique, was it's not going to work this year, and they're still doing it. So I really like what I see. Like I said, I wouldn't call myself a fan of theirs, but I like a lot of their players. I think I'm just, a fan of what they're trying to do there, and I don't love that they get so much heat for some of the stuff. So, great win for them, regardless of really what you think of the Bengals. I mean, a 20-point win against anybody is a good win. So, I like where they're at.
Yeah. Well, and then on the flip side there, speaking of the Bengals, right? I've heard Joe Burrow and some of these interviews and talk about, well, yeah, obviously you don't want to be in this spot, but you look at the rest of the season, you got to go, whatever. You got to go 7-2, or you got to go, 6-3. Like, they're at a point now where they have got 9 games left on their schedule, and they've got to not only win probably 8 of those to get into the playoffs now, but they're going to have to beat the Steelers twice, likely. They're going to have to beat the Ravens, and they're going to have to beat the Browns again. Now, I'm not super high on the Browns, but clearly with Jameis Winston, that team's frisky.
Different, yeah.
They may not win a lot of football games, but they're going to win some, and they're going to win more with Jameis. And the Browns played the Bengals tough a couple weeks ago even. So I don't really think the Bengals have much of a shot at this point now of even sniffing the playoffs. They're in too tough of a division. The Steelers look really good. I hate to say it, but Russ looks like maybe he isn't cooked. And that team is just well coached. They're well constructed. They've got a lot of really good players on that team, and that's what it's all about. And the Ravens are a super good team too, and we'll touch on them a little bit further. But the Bengals are just in a really tough spot. And this is what happens when you strip down your roster because you are trying to avoid paying guys, avoid having to get into luxury tax issues, or you just want to be cheap in certain areas and think, well, we'll just, give our quarterback the bag and he'll just lift us out of the bottom of the barrel. And you just can't do that in the NFL. You still have to have 21 other guys on offense and defense outside of the quarterback that can do it. And if you only have one solid guy, and I'm not saying they only have one, but they got rid of Joe Mixon. They didn't want to pay him. They got rid of Bates, their safety, didn't want to pay him. They've gotten rid of some linebackers, some corners. They just refuse to pay guys, and it's showing. That's the product you get on the field is, you've got a great quarterback, probably a top 3, top 5 quarterback in the NFL, but he isn't going to win the football game if your defense gives up 37 points. Just not going to happen.
You might shut this down, but kind of a hot take on this. The salaries and stuff better and how that all would work. But, we talked a couple weeks back about Zach Taylor being on the hot seat, talked about, ownership, being cheap, not paying players. And then you just mentioned, Burrow's interviews recently. And it's like, yes, we got to win, 8 out of 10 games or, 7 over 9 games. And it's like, okay, well, that's going to be pretty tough. But he's not saying anything terrible, but I think when you just look at his demeanor and how he's answering those questions, not only do I not believe that he actually thinks any of that stuff is possible, but he's starting to feel like he's pretty fed up with where things are at. Instead of Zach Taylor necessarily being on the hot seat, which not that he isn't, but what are the chances that Burrow asks out Cincinnati, that he demands he gets traded out of there? Again, salary stuff, I don't know how that would all be possible, but I'm kind of picturing like a Jared Goff or Matt Stafford type of thing where I think that worked out for both teams obviously really well. But at the time, everyone's saying, well, you think Matt Stafford's an upgrade to Jared Goff. Again, Goff's looked great this year, and he's done well with the Lions, but I think that was kind of thought. what are the chances he gets to that point? He said, I don't care if you fire so, because we just say that all the time. These teams are in trouble. Like, well, they already paid the quarterback. Can't get rid of the quarterback, right? You're not getting rid of Trevor Lawrence. It's going to be Doug Peterson. They already paid him. But they did pay him. But what if he says, hey, I'm not playing. I'm going to, any wrist injury, any of this, I'm sitting, I don't know how all that stuff would play out. But even if it's quietly, he's like, hey, I don't want to make a fuss about this, but you guys aren't willing to spend. I'm not wasting my prime here when you guys won't do it. Send me somewhere. We got to figure this out. Send me somewhere. I think that's a possibility at this point.
Yeah, I don't hate that take at all, actually. I don't know that can happen salary cap wise this year or even next year. But according to overthecap.com, which does, keep track of, the annual salary caps for teams and each player individually as well. If the Bengals were to cut Joe Burrow prior to June 1st, heading into the 2026 season, so he'd have to finish this season and next season. He only costs about 750 grand against the cap, which is nothing, right? If they continue to keep him, then that number goes up again. So he's got something built into his contract, and I haven't looked at the details of it enough to know, exactly how that works. But my understanding would be that, going into the 2026 season, if they miss the playoffs this year, and I mean, what are they going to do at wide receiver? They're probably not going to pay Chase and Higgins. So next year, they're probably going to be worse skill wise than they are this year. There's a chance that they have an even worse year next year. I would say it's a very legitimate situation that Joe Burrow says, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this anymore. Send me somewhere else. If you recall back when he was coming out of LSU, there was a lot of people saying that he should refuse to go to Cincinnati because of how cheap the owner is. I mean, I think people were even like talking about Carson Palmer and like, look how good Carson Palmer was. And the Bengals basically refused to put anything around him, refused to pay anybody. They were so cheap, and he basically cost him his whole career there. So I
I'm
wouldn't be shocked.
I'm picturing in the short term, and again, I don't know how all this stuff can play out or would, but as far as like making salaries match, I mean, what if they call, he goes in, says, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. Get me out of here. They call up Miami Dolphins and say, hey, Tua for so and so, and obviously, we'll have to give us a few picks as well. Something like that. I mean, salaries have to be comparable, I would guess. But I mean, whether Dak Prescott and the Cowboys, obviously the Cowboys don't look great, but you know the team and the franchise, and they were at least a lot closer than what the Bengals appear to be. I mean, if they were to do some kind of swap with that, now again, I would assume whoever makes that deal is going to want Burrow, right? I mean, we're saying he's a top 3 guy. So anybody other than if you got Mahomes, Allen, and maybe Lamar, I would assume would take the call and listen. If salaries are somewhat comparable, you wouldn't give up a pick for him or something. I mean, again, if you got Dak Prescott, you can get Joe Burrow for about the same money and give up a pick or two in the future. I mean, something like that. I feel like if Burrow's saying, "Get me the hell out of here," or "I'm not playing," I don't know. I'd be curious to see what could be done. It feels like just looking at him and seeing his demeanor, he looks pretty fed up.
Yeah, I mean, he's a dude who likes winning, clearly. And I don't see them doing a whole lot of that here in the next couple of years with the way their roster is constructed. The nice thing about the NFL is there's a lot of salary like reconfigurations or restructuring that can be done to contracts that isn't necessarily available in all the other sports. So there's usually some creative ways to make some of these trades work, even if financially it doesn't look like it at first. So I think that's something to keep an eye on, because if I'm Joe Burrow at some point, I'm not going to want to sit there and get beat up because I'm playing behind a crappy offensive line and my defense is giving up 30 to 40 points a game. So I have to drop back 50 times just to even give us a chance. So yeah, totally agree there. They are in a very, very tough spot here, and I don't know how it gets fixed unless their owner decides to open up the checkbook and start looking for some serious talent and paying for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, staying in the AFC North,
Yeah.
let's talk Browns Ravens, which might have been one of the biggest upsets maybe the biggest upset of the week. Browns beat the Super Bowl favorite Baltimore Ravens. So a lot of teams very, very high on the Ravens. I think we're pretty high on them as well. But, in typical Ravens fashion, they lose one that you're scratch your head about, just like the Raiders lost. So, what do we make of what's going on with Baltimore? Is this a sign of maybe some cracks in their foundation, or is this just a situation where a new leader at the helm in Cleveland is just putting them on the right track?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of everything, and not going back to Cincy at all. But this is exactly why. What does their future look like? Because this is how tough that division is. You count the Browns out and saying they're absolutely nothing, and they take out a team in their division who we consider to be Super Bowl favorites or right up there with them. When I mean that's the division. How do you figure around it? These games are going to happen, right? If you're in that division, it's going to happen, right? I mean, the Steelers, I can be super high on them. They're going to lose some of these division games. They might lose to the Browns. That might happen. I think when you play each other that often, just the style that most of those teams play with, I just think there's going to be some of those games where you don't bring your best stuff and they're really juiced up for whatever reason it is. I think it was kind of a combination of that with this game. I think the Browns not having Deshaun Watson had that little energy boost. We've seen Jameis Winston play, and maybe we'll get into him a little further as well as what his future might hold. He clearly has talent. The guy can play NFL quarterback. It's just how consistent can he be, right? When you throw that many touchdowns, but also that many interceptions, I don't think anybody's really willing to pay you a huge chunk to be your starting quarterback. But to come in and be that backup, play a game or two, and if you get him on the right spot, he can get you a couple games, which is great. So the talent's there. He clearly seems to be, a great teammate that people love. Everyone sees his pep talks and everything that's going on. So I think he just gave them a real big jolt coming into the game, which was huge. And then the Ravens had gotten on a nice little roll, right? They started slow and then they got on a nice little roll. So, felt like one of those inevitable losses that's going to come, right? We kind of feel the same thing. The Chiefs at some point are going to stumble. They're going to lose to Denver or somebody, whoever it might be. So I think those games happen. It's in division. They know each other really well. The only real concern I have for them, I guess the two concerns is one is that defense. You give up 29 points to the Browns. Again, got a little jolt from Jameis, but that's still a lot of points to give up to a Browns team that has not been scoring at all with Deshaun. So that just, I think it's been something we've had an eye on, all season. I think you're going to have to keep an eye on that, see if they make any moves to bolster that a little bit. But I think their defense could definitely be an issue. And then the same thing, just comes down to the Lamar. In those big games and those big moments when you really need him. Again, we've seen it with the Chiefs nonstop. They're in one-score games every single week, and they seem to pull those out regularly. It doesn't mean they're never going to lose one. They regularly pull those out because Mahomes can make whatever happen, make anything happen that needs to happen. Lamar at times just you don't know if he's going to do that. Sometimes he will, and it's a spectacular play. And other times he just comes up a little bit short. So I think it was just kind of one of those weird mixes. Again, the Browns really with a little extra energy with Jameis coming in there. Ravens probably having a little bit of an off day. Division matchup. Yeah, not obviously a good loss for them. That would have been a big one. Steelers pick up a win. I mean, every game in that division, at least between those two teams, Steelers and Ravens for sure, is going to make a difference at the end of the year on their seeding. So, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, I actually I don't think that's a bad loss for the Ravens. I know that on the surface losing to I believe the Browns were 1-6 going into the game. I know that doesn't look good losing to a team like that, but it's like you said, it's a division game. The Browns just play everybody in their division. I feel like they play pretty tough. It's like you said, it's the style of football, right? When you play that kind of tough, grinded out style of football, especially in interdivision, it seems like they play a lot of that with each other, more so than they do even with other teams, it seems. You're bound to lose some of those games. And I don't think I'm that worried about the Ravens, losing a bunch of bad games, especially when you get into the playoffs. Like, I don't see them losing like a really bad one. But I agree with you on the defensive side that they need to address that side of the football. And we haven't talked about this yet, but they just traded for Deontay Johnson this week from the Carolina Panthers. And I like the trade. I just don't think it moves the needle very much for them. I don't think it's a bad trade because they didn't give up much for him and he improves, their wide receiving core. But they have got to add something on the defensive end, maybe more than one piece to get this to be a team that I think is going to be feared when we come to the playoffs. Because you mentioned the Chiefs. The Chiefs have a fantastic defense. They have a quarterback who is as close to Tom Brady right now as we've seen, just in terms of the way he plays the game. He's playing football the way Tom Brady was playing football most of his career, where there's going to be times where he's going to look fantastic. There's other times where he just wins a lot of football games by making the right plays at the right time. And when you combine that with a great defense, you have a lot of success. The Ravens have not managed to add that up together. They've had some outstanding defenses over the last few years, and then Lamar kind of lets you down in the playoffs. Or Lamar's having a great season, but the defense is kind of letting you down. They've got to figure out a way to combine it. I need to see Lamar come through in the clutch in these big moments. And until he does that with a consistent basis, and especially until he does it in the playoffs, there's going to be a lot of pressure on that team to actually get to that next level. So that's a concern that I have for the Ravens, especially if I were a Ravens fan right now. I would be wondering, do we have enough to compete?
No, and I think the other one thing we didn't touch on either is, speaking of the offense, as Derrick Henry, it just feels at times like they don't totally know what they want to do, or I would say maybe just like in games. And I like Harbaugh. I think he's a good coach, but they get away from their identity at times. And we saw it in the playoffs last year. They're throwing the ball too much. And, you see how they get to certain spots, how they become successful throughout the regular season. And then it just seems like in these tough moments where it gets to be a gritty game, that they just kind of get away from who they are. I mean, they weren't really down throughout the game. They could have easily continued to stick with their run game and do what they do. But Derrick Henry had 11 attempts all game long. That just seems like very strange.
Not enough.
No, he's been getting 20, in a lot of these games. So it's just like when you think about cutting it by 50%, it's one thing to average 20 and you get 17 or 18. It'd be, okay, a little bit of a this or that, just try some different plays. But when you see it kind of cut in half from where it's been, you just got to wonder, why would we have gotten away from it? And I'm not saying there's not a potential explanation that they would have. But again, it just seems in a lot of these games when they do lose, whether it's the playoffs or regular season, it's because they kind of lose who they are and what they're trying to accomplish. And I just find that strange. When you watch a lot of the best teams, they're doing what they do regularly. I'd be less aggravated with them if they're down 21-0 and they're still running the ball. I'd be like, well, at least they're sticking with what they do, right? That's their game plan. That's how they go about it. You get to them like, well, you're not going to be able to catch up, and then that'd be a fair critique. But when you're in close games, why would you get away from an identity that you have, that you're better than the other team? I don't care what defense they're playing. I think their run game, their offensive run game, is going to be stronger than any defense they're playing, that they should at least stick with that. So that's another concern that, is just a little strange for them. But I mean, again, one game is not going to have me lose faith in what they are. Again, it's a tough opponent just in our division. So I still think they'll be totally fine. I think they'll probably rack up a few wins in a row again. But yeah, definitely an interesting game for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a little bit on the flip side, I do want to talk a little Jameis Winston because I think I've got a bit of a hot take out here. And that is that I think Jameis Winston deserves a shot like Baker Mayfield got. And I don't know that the Browns are the right situation for him, in part because this injury with Deshaun doesn't change the fact that they've got a massive contract problem with him beyond this year. So the Browns really don't have they could move off of Deshaun, but they're still going to have to pay him like $76 million. I think it's next year and the year beyond. So what kind of roster are you going to get if you have $76 million taken up each year on a quarterback that you're not going to play? Probably not much of a roster. So I don't know that this is the best long-term fit for Jameis, but I think he's showing that under the right circumstances, he can play quarterback. He's got 4 touchdowns to no interceptions this year. He threw no picks against the Ravens. He played a really good football game, a really clean football game. And I think that goes to show a couple things. One, Kevin Stefanski might actually be a pretty good football coach still, even though that team is awful. And it's really not his fault. He didn't ask for Deshaun Watson. The owner wanted him, brought him in. Stefanski had to play him. And I think it also shows that Jameis, under a good offensive coach, might still have something in him. And I'd like to see Jameis maybe in Miami, right? I know Tua's back, but you just got to think like that's not
That's gonna
long for the
where,
NFL.
what options would he have? I mean, I was just kind of looking through the teams and like where would even be a potential landing spot, assuming you're right with the Browns, and it's kind of like, okay, well, when he comes back, we still owe him this money. There's only a few teams that I'd say don't have a quarterback, and they're not in a far off position than the Browns. You can say Daniel Jones in New York, but they're kind of in a similar, not as bad, obviously, but similar. They owe him a lot of money. I mean, Panthers, maybe the
What about
Raiders,
the Colts?
the Colts. I was thinking.
I
I
was
mean,
thinking the Colts, right?
yeah,
Because Joe
potential.
Flacco's on a one, he's a really old quarterback, and so you're probably not looking at him as your even short-term solution in reality. I mean, for this year, it's what you've got. Anthony Richardson's not the guy there. I could see Shane Steichen saying, "Look, I think I could do something with it." And they've got a couple weapons. They've got that Downs receiver and Pittman. They've got Jonathan Taylor. I think that roster in Indianapolis is good enough that if you plugged in a quarterback who could have some success under a really good offensive coach, I kind of like what they would have. So that's one spot where I think Jameis could go and potentially thrive similarly to where what Baker's doing in Tampa Bay right
Yeah, I like that one. I think the question is simply, are they completely done with Anthony Richardson, right? And I don't know how quickly we will, full answer on that as far as the long term. It sounds like they're saying Flacco's our guy for the season. We're not going to go back and forth a bunch at this point. So it does sound like that's fairly clear. But yeah, as far as the future, don't know. I don't know. I assume someone would give him a chance somewhere. I don't know if the Browns would end up getting him at some point, letting him play behind Deshaun and going that route. But I do like the Colts roster. I mean, I think Jameis his thing is. I mean, purely when I think of a lot of those teams, I kind of think of they need to be somewhat conservative. Flacco I think fits because they got a pretty decent defense. They got some good weapons, but they just need to be a little more conservative. I think that's been Jameis's downfall from the beginning. Is just he's a little too erratic. He's too up and down with his game. I don't know who the right, QB coach is that he could get with. But if someone getting just to rein it in a little bit, you want obviously the explosive plays and some of the risks that he takes. That's what makes him good. Also, you got to be able to cut down a little bit on some of those turnovers. I mean, this last game, yeah, is beautiful. If he can replicate that over and over again, someone absolutely will take a shot on him. But I think he needs to either prove that consistently, which again, I mean, he's going to have the rest of the year here. If he can put together, a 75% of the games that they're in, he's not the problem or an issue that a reason as to why they lost, because I assume they'll lose a lot of those games. But if at least most of those games it's not on him, I agree completely. I think there's at least a few teams, if not quite a handful, that could take a chance on him, and I think would dumb to maybe stay with what they have versus going after him, especially with some of the quarterbacks coming in. I don't know. Some people I think are higher on some than others. But yeah, depending how you feel about the incoming class, say, hey, we can get him, and you're not going to have to give him a massive deal, I wouldn't think, right? I mean, it could be a very modest deal.
now. No, I would
I could
guess
love him.
it'd be a very team friendly deal.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody should be shut down when they've put up some of the numbers that he has at times. I like the idea of him getting a chance. Like I said, he'll have plenty of games here to show it this year and if someone's taken interest.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, the Browns have suddenly gotten mildly interesting as a team to watch because that roster is actually not that bad if you have a quarterback. So if he keeps playing this way, I mean, they could be frisky in terms of like being a thorn in the side of a lot of AFC teams the rest of the way. Even if they don't make the playoffs, they could cause some problems and wreak a little havoc in the playoff race.
You could picture
But
that being fun for
yeah, we
James. It's purely just taking out other teams. Like we're not going to get. We just want to not let them
yeah.
get in, kind of thing. He would actually enjoy that.
Yeah, and I feel like all of the Cleveland fans would enjoy it. Their players would enjoy it. I think that's something that they could rally around. So something to look forward to maybe the rest of the season. But let's talk a little fantasy football here before we wrap our episode up this week. And fantasy football, I'll start off here because my team went from the gutter the week before where I had to shotgun a beer. Literally, I came home from the hospital to pick up a couple of extra things that we forgot when my wife was going into labor, and I quickly shotgun a beer because I realized like I needed to get this done before game time Thursday night. This week, my team went, my team was awesome. We scored like 140 points, went from barely could score to, was scoring way too much in 1 week. I would have liked to even it out a little bit, but moved to 5-3, and I'm sitting in fourth place in the league. Can't be too worried about my position at this point, unlike kind of where you're sitting here. So I know the last 2 weeks you have balked at my slumping comments, but now that you're 4-4, do you have any other thoughts about your team's performance?
I mean, still, it's see how things end up playing out, right? You can always look like an idiot down the road, but it's funny how those things. It reminds me of the college football playoff, right? It's if you beat, you lose to Georgia the first or someone the first week of the season, and then you win all these games. Everyone remembers all these games that you just recently won, and that's what gets you into the playoff. You lose your conference championship. That's the only game. Georgia loses one game to Alabama in the conference championship, and they don't make it into the playoffs. So it's kind of, I mean, you're technically a game ahead of me, but you're fourth place, I'm in fifth place, and we just kind of have flipped. I started 4-0 and have lost four. You started, did you start 0-2, I think, or 0-3?
I think I was 0-2. Yeah, 0-2.
Two, and so you've won a lot more than you've lost since that point. So it just kind of has that opposite feel of like this is what's happened recently. I'm looking at it still as points wise. I think I'm number for two in the league in total points scored, lost by 2 points again, and again it was overperformed my
Yeah, I don't know how many
expectation.
times you can lose by less than 5 points. It's kind of crazy looking at your score.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a decent team. It's not an absolute juggernaut by any means, but it's a good team. I think the first few weeks I won some close games, and then the last few weeks I've lost some close games. So, kind of your point, like to balance out some years, I guess I don't know what's better, having some monster games and then chugging a beer, or just being consistently decent and still ending up with about the same record. Yeah, I mean, fortunately, we're still in fifth. There's a lot of 4-4 teams, though. So, I mean, I think 5-9 are all 4-4. So this week is going to be a big one. How to get this one to stay at least on the top end of those teams. Which, yeah, it'll be a battle. I need Caleb Williams to put up more than 8 points. That always kills you when your quarterback does that. I switched off of Anthony Richardson, got to Caleb Williams, and kind of where we're at. So yeah, we are slightly reeling, but don't feel terrible yet. I'm not giving up.
Well, that's good to hear. Well, talking last thing we want to talk about here before we finish up this episode is our locks of the week. So last week, first time this season where we both hit on our locks of the week. That being said, we're 8-6 on the season. So even prior to this week, we didn't have a single week where we both hit. One of us was always hitting. And I think that's kind of the general theme, is that one of us has always been right. And last week, we both pieced it together on the same week. I had Atlanta -2.5, and Jeff had Pittsburgh -6.5. Both of those hit. Jeff, do you have any thoughts on yours? I know you kind of mentioned a little bit maybe in our pregame show that it's possible that you were a little concerned there at the very end, but I know for me, I felt pretty good about mine most of the way, even though it did end up being a relatively close game. But the Buccaneers did have to score 9 unanswered points in the fourth just to make it a 4-point game. So never felt too concerned. Any other thoughts on your win?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good win. Nice to get in the right column. Probably just need to rely on the teams that I've been praising here on the show, and then they'll help me win some money doing it. But yeah, it's we talked about any of those big spread games. Always going to be a little tougher. You just never know about the backdoor covers and stuff happening. That was kind of where it got to. I guess they probably had a chance to tie the game. But yeah, it was a good game overall. There was multiple touchdowns that were called back for the Steelers, or I guess if you want to call them that. One was I think a face mask on them that Pickens scored on, and then the Pickens touchdown that two of the same foot doesn't count as two separate feet in the end zone, so that one didn't count either. So I thought the Steelers did look better than even the score showed. I thought they could have easily won by 2 touchdowns, but yeah, it did get close at the end. So nice to get a W, help the team out a little bit, and hoping this week we can do more of the same.
Yeah, so you're up to 3-4 now. I'm at 5-2 on the season, and we're looking to have back-to-back weeks where we both get it right. So this week, I'm gonna go out on a limb a little bit here with my pick. I actually don't think it's a crazy pick, and I'll explain my justification for it. But I'm looking at that Jaguars-Eagles game, and I like the Jaguars in this spot at plus 7.5 points. So here's my thought process on this, right? The Eagles have looked good the last few weeks offensively. They've been playing well, but I think the Jaguars are clearly a very desperate team still, right? They're 2-6. They keep losing these close games. They did lose 2 big games to the Bills and the Bears, but outside of that, they've been playing a lot of close games. And 7.5 points is a ton of points to be giving up in the NFL. I could easily see this game being a backdoor cover, where the Eagles are in control the entire game. Jaguars get a late touchdown, late field goal, something happens at the end of the game when the Eagles don't really care about the outcome anymore, and that all of a sudden covers that spread. You get more than a touchdown here, so I love that, and I think it's a real opportunity to take a team that has nothing to lose and give them 7.5 points. I think I think the 2-6 Jaguars are probably more like a 4-4 football team. I think they're 2-6 because they have played some pretty unimpressive football at times, but they are talented enough to be closer to maybe 4-4. I think the Eagles, while they're I do think the Eagles are a good team, and they're sitting at, I believe, 5-2 right now. I think the Eagles are maybe a little closer to 4-3 at that record. So 4-3, maybe they are good enough at 5-2. I don't know. They're getting hot, but love the amount of points I'm getting there. Too hard to pass that up. So my lock of the week is Jaguars plus 7.5.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, like I said, at this point, the Jags have nothing to lose. They just played a tough game against the Packers, lost by 3. When you're talking that many points, like I said, in theory, the Eagles could be in control all game, be up 14 points, 2 scores, 2 touchdowns at the very end of the game, and, defense just kind of take some time off the clock. They score 1 touchdown, make it a 7-point game, and then finish, and you're covered there. So I think at that many points, there's a lot of opportunities for them to be able to cover. But yeah, I think that's a solid pick. On the other hand, I'm going to go with pick that's a little closer spread. So I'm going to go with the Rams +1 for the Seahawks. We've talked about the Seahawks a few different times this season, and I think they started 3-0, and then they lost 3 games in 11-day span. I think they've won 1 and lost 1 since then. So yeah, they're right middle of the road. I just don't really trust them this year. I don't feel like they have any consistency. I don't feel like they have a ton of really good wins. They just got beat down by the Bills, pretty bad. So I just don't feel great about them in general. Rams, on the other hand, they've been decimated with injuries all year. It feels like they've had half their team. I know it's not the case, but it's felt that way. Get Puka and Cup back this weekend. They look great. Now, is Minnesota as good as their record indicated at one point? I don't know. They're probably a team a lot of us were a little skeptical on it at 5-0 at the time, sitting at 5-2. But I mean that's a good win. That defense is a good defense, right? We've been talking about them a ton this year, and the Rams put up what 30 on them, was it? I think win by 10, right? Talking about again a 7.5 point spread. They win by 10 against them. So I just thought that's a great win. I think everybody likes Stafford as a quarterback, getting his two weapons back. They looked like they were perfectly healthy. Like they didn't miss a step coming in there. So, essentially a pick 'em game. Worst case, something happens, someone misses, an extra point, you lose by one. They do got the 1 point. I don't really care much for that. Pretty much just a pick 'em game at this point. But yeah, I just think the Rams, if they win this game, can put themselves in a position to be tied for first in that division potentially. So I just think you win one, you get your players back, you win this game, and you're tied in first in your division. Feels like all that stuff that happened the first half of the season. Don't have to worry about it. Everything is in front of you that you want. So lock of the week for me, Rams +1 over the Seahawks.
I love it. This feels like a 2-0 week again. And, as they say, I think after this week we'll be heating up. So lock those picks in. We are giving out some great gambling advice, and it's time for you all to cash in on our great wisdom. So lock those in, and we're gonna wrap up this week's episode. Again, sorry to cut us a little short this week, but new dad's got to get some sleep and get back into a routine. So we'll hopefully be back next week with a more traditional setup, as you've come to expect from the Just Ballin' podcast. But thank you, as always, for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Shoot us your comments, questions. We'd love to answer those here on the pod. And we will see you all next week.
So.